The Prime Minister has finally weighed in on Canada's position on South Africa's genocide claim against Israel.
Our wholehearted support of the IGA and its processes does not mean that we support the premise of the case brought forward by South Africa.
Okay, so what does this position reveal about Canada's perspective, and how does this quicken or confuse the political pulse across the country? I'm joined by our three party insiders back for the first time this year. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer and now with CAN Strategies. Melanie Richer is a former Director of Communications for the New Democratic Party, now a senior consultant with Earnscliffe Strategies. And Fred Delory, former Conservative campaign manager and partner at North Star Public Affairs. Good to see you all, gang.
Good to see you.
Greg, help me on this one with the statement on the genocide allegations against Israel. It took a couple of days for the government to get out with this. Support for the court, no clear position on the allegation against Israel. Why do you think they sort of preserve this more neutral position?
I think it's exactly the same things we talked about before the Christmas holidays, in terms of the what the Liberal caucus has to straddle in terms of where they represent and who those representatives are, and finding that kind of middle sweet spot. And the reality is, Canada in the world on this issue is not one of the bigger players. There's a lot of domestic politics about this, but what we're saying internationally, sometimes we get used by, Hamas made a statement, and, a lot of people jumped on that before Christmas. I took note of your earlier panels, the former advisor to the Prime Minister.
Roland Paris.
Yeah, he talked about how, where Germany was on this. A lot of people were saying, like, well, where's Canada? I think, we're forgetting where we are in terms of other countries on this. And even your media panel, the journalists before, weren't entirely sure where people were on this. In terms of domestic politics, I think the Prime Minister did what he needed to do. The last thing they want to do is do anything that's going to inflame this.
Yeah, Mel, I was wondering about that, like taking a firm side with everything we're seeing in the cities and streets of Canada might have inflamed things. I know that may not satisfy people on an intellectual level, but I don't know if that's the motivation there or not. What's your assessment of what happened?
Right, throughout Canada, and even within his own caucus, right? This has been a difficult issue to land exactly what the government's going to be doing. It'll be interesting to see where this goes, because this isn't going anywhere soon. So maybe we're going to see a clarification of the government's position as where Canada stands. But to your point, it was interesting, he had a statement today, but it didn't really say much.
Fred, no lack of clarity from Pierre Poilievre. Explicit, he's with Israel, that's it, full stop. An easier position, an easier issue for the Conservative and his base.
Absolutely. Pierre Poilievre is one of, I would say, Israel's strongest allies in the world. When you look at all world leaders and their positions on this, Poilievre has been very, very clear and concise on this, and there's nothing missing here on that, where he stands on these issues. Okay,
let's get to the issues you all wanted to raise, because I'm sure you didn't want to talk about Israel and genocide on a Friday evening here in Ottawa. But Fred, you've got a misplay for us, and this is on the whole issue of Liberals and housing.
Well, look, the number one issue in Canada right now, one of the big issues, is housing. And it's a major crisis we have. And it came out this week, Canadian Press did some really good journalism on this, some really good research. They did the ATIPs and got the information that showed 2 years ago the federal government was aware that their immigration numbers were going to cause these problems if we weren't building the houses. And we all agree immigration is incredibly important to this country. This is a land of immigrants where we need this influx of people to continue growth. But the government has failed at preparing for this growth. It's a great idea to bring in all these people, but you got to do the groundwork, and now the evidence is coming out that they didn't do the groundwork. And this is just going to give Mr. Poilievre more fuel to attack the government on.
Yes, he sees on a Canadian Press article, right? I just want to point that out, that this is the news organization that we all take as credible on this particular one. Greg, on this, Sean Fraser is the housing minister now. He was the immigration minister at the time when these warnings were made. I know it's way more complicated than just the immigration stream causing the housing shortage. There's all the municipal issues, there's provincial government issues and challenges as well. How much of a problem is this, do you think, for your crowd?
Well, because we exist in a context and nuance-free zone, and probably problematic, but shouldn't be. Because I am not surprised as somebody who worked for cabinet ministers that advice would be given. I think they're aware of that. All big decisions like that, they have to take a look at, what are the impacts going to be on healthcare? Will there be another, access to information? And great, I mean, I understand why everybody wants to pat Canadian Press on the back, perhaps for the reasons you just stated. But let's remember, 2 years ago, what were we dealing with? The backlog from the pandemic. The Premier of Ontario was demanding more immigrants. Why is that not part of the story? Yes, the government was not as prepared as they should have been about this issue. They said that quietly in Charlottetown in the summer at the cabinet retreat. But there are a lot more issues here. I would say another issue, if I'm going to be critical of the Liberal government, is Sean Fraser was there for about 2 years, and his predecessor was there for about 2 years, and their predecessor was there for about 2 years. So you have a problem when you are, rotating cabinet ministers in and out. It's really tough. But the mission of the day 2 years ago was not around this. We were dealing with post-pandemic, or still kind of in the pandemic, and I think that's part of the context that should be mentioned.
Yeah, and look, the changes to the private college system and what they could do there, there was a bunch of factors that have led to this multiplication of people coming in, Mel, and it's led to this acute sort of challenge and political tension for the Liberals to deal with right now. Where do you think this one goes?
I think that everything that you were just saying, Greg, is totally valid, but I still think the fact that it was raised that, the immigration was outpacing housing that we even had available and nothing was done about it since then, I think that's the problem. The problem was not that the immigration numbers stay the same. I think that that's legitimate. It's the fact that we haven't been able to build homes that are actually affordable since then. I think that's a big problem. I think that's one of the things that...
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think that's one of the things that plays into this, and I think that the other thing, outside of permanent residency, is the other problems that we've seen with immigration.
The temporary residence.
Exactly, with temporary residence. That has blown up. That has, students has gone up. So the fact that not only just on permanent residence, we've seen these other programs grow up, and no real solution to deal with the influx. And to your point, nobody's saying that this isn't needed. We have a labor shortage that is so important to address.
This is part of the problem. You need people to build a house, right?
And that's the point I want to make. I yield my time back. If someone could tell me how we're going to address the housing shortage without immigration. What I was told by somebody in September was, the average immigrant that comes in, their contribution to, say, a large apartment complex, within 7 weeks, they've contributed enough for they and their family to live in Canada with that work. So I find we are missing part of the story when we move real quick.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of tensions in this, right? And it's no one cause and no one solution, but as you point out, Fred, it's a bit of a political challenge. I'm going to save Mel's pick for the end because I want to end on a nice note. So, Greg, I'm going to go to you now. What do you got for us?
So there was a press conference today for the Conservative leader in Winnipeg, and he took the first question from an organization called Rebel. And the reporter, the first question he took was somebody that was in the news earlier this week for getting arrested and not charged for something, an event that Chrystia Freeland was at. And since then, we've had Conservative MPs try to suggest that the government had this individual arrested. There's amnesia because he was arrested and removed from events for Andrew Scheer and for Melissa Lantsman. And the reason he was removed at the Melissa Lantsman event was she felt, according to news reports at the time, and there's a video that the Rebel posted on this, that she felt he was being homophobic to her. And he says something to her in a question, are you the candidate based on merit or your sexual orientation? So what I find really interesting is that is who the Conservative leader chose to take the first question from today. Now, remember in 2019 when they were trying to get rid of Andrew Scheer, Melissa Lantsman was a prominent former Conservative staffer on the Hill before she was an MP. She wrote an op-ed, co-wrote an op-ed saying that Andrew Scheer and his actions, beliefs, lack of actions on LGBTQ issues was not helping the Conservatives go forward. And we were told that there were new Conservatives. There were allies like Michelle Rempel-Garner, Eric Duncan, and Melissa Lantsman. What message, there's a lot of talk about how the Conservative leader deals with the media, but what message did he send today by choosing that individual in Winnipeg to have the first question?
Fred, what do you make of that? Because the Conservatives jumped on this as, after 8 years of Justin Trudeau, journalists are getting arrested and forgetting or ignoring what had happened in the past, and then this today. Well, how do you think that plays?
Well, to Greg's points on this, there has been a history with Rebel and conservative conservative events where they have been banned and not allowed. the visuals is what's so terrible in this. Mr. Menzies was trying to interview, and yes, it was probably an ambush where he came out of nowhere and he was trying to interview her. But the police officer, the person there, was so out of line to throw his arm up and to blockade and say you're being arrested. The visual created the story, and we live in a digital
But
media.
the same visual is there at the Melissa Lansman event.
No, it's not. It's not.
No, there's an 8-minute video I watched today on Rebel's news site.
There's no police there.
No, the
who
police
are
arrest
saying,
them.
okay, but they're not there because the police jumped in front of him basically and said, you just assaulted me. That's the issue here, and that's what gives the visual, and that's what fuels this, and this is what allows it to go
But about the
crazy online.
convenient embracing of Rebel, right? That I think that's what Greg's trying to get to, right? Is there's a bit of maybe hypocrisy.
But it's not so convenient. Mr. Poilievre has embraced Rebel for some time now. Since when he was running for leader of the party, they were clearly working together on different things. The owner of Rebel is Ezra Levant. Pierre used to work for him.
Right.
There's a relationship there. So this isn't a new thing that we're seeing.
Mel, what's your take on that one?
Yeah, I think, agree with some of the things that were said. I think what we saw with the embracing of Rebel, forget, some of the reporting that Rebel does being quite dangerous, and the way that they do some of the reporting as dangerous and harmful to people in this country. I think outside of that, outside of the hypocrisy, and maybe because I have, I've traveled with a leader before, so I know that the leader in no way, shape, or form is going to tell the RCMP or the security or whatever who to arrest and who to not.
Yeah.
And Pierre Poilievre would know that very well as well. But park that aside for a sec. What I found was a loss on this week, separate of that, is the whole communication around it. The Conservatives were solid in 2023. They were able to punch through in 2023 because they stuck to a message of affordability and they stuck to a message of housing. This message, just a few weeks ago, they were saying, well, we can't trust journalists at all. Journalists are all in Trudeau's pocket. And then this week he's saying, oh my God, can you believe this journalist been treated this way? Those are so conflicting, and it's almost like pick a lane a little bit. The people listening, okay, well, am I supposed to be taking a list of which journalists are good, which journalists are not good? It just felt like, okay, so you're saying these journalists are, listening to Trudeau. I see that you've got advertising all over Rebel. Well, then are you just doing the same thing? It seemed super conflicting to me, not a good message. And it also just brought them off of their message of affordability and housing. So I thought from a communications perspective to regular folks who are tuning in, it was forget, everything else. It was also just a loss on that front.
Yeah, I do, just to go back to the incident of this week, like Fred, what the police officer did there. I know the RCMP says they're reviewing this, but police in this country are powered with the ability to carry weapons and deprive citizens of their freedom, and that needs to be exercised judiciously. And that the way that
happened,
that physical bumping happened, whatever you think of Menzies, whatever you think of Rebel, that is an issue. I think that I'm curious to see what the RCMP is going to say about that once they do their particular review and accept it was the RCMP officer who made that decision. It was not ordered by the Prime Minister or any politician. Okay, a couple of heavy ones there. Mel, not that this isn't heavy,
yes.
But you wanted to talk about Ed Broadbent,
I did.
which was a big story this week.
I did, yes. We, we sadly lost Ed Broadbent yesterday, former NDP leader and former NDP MP, and really somebody that I think people from all political stripes have really good memories of and have really good stories of. And whether they agreed with him or not, had good things to say about him. I didn't get the privilege of working with him closely, but I did work closely with Jagmeet. And through that, I got to see Ed's character in a really real way. You folks may not remember, but 2019 was not a really fun year for Jagmeet. It was not a fun year for the NDP. I think it was back in January. It was a CBC story that broke that, we had 9 MPs that were saying he needed to resign if he wasn't going to win his by-election. And those stories just got worse in the lead up to the 2019 election, where it ended. It was, we were going to lose all our MPs, all our seats, and it was going to be the end for Jagmeet. etc. And at a time where no one really in the party wanted to stand with Jagmeet, do anything with Jagmeet publicly. In private and public, Ed always picked up the phone. He always had encouragement. He gave advice. He had a listening ear. He showed up in public, took pictures, campaigned with him. And I think that that shows the measure of the man that he was, but also the measure of the politician Excuse me. And on that, maybe just to end there, that continued, until the very end. He was still super supportive of Jagmeet and what Jagmeet was trying to accomplish with the supply and confidence agreement, and was a huge fan of dental care. And I was saying to folks earlier that this week I got a note that somebody I love very much was able to apply for dental care and will be getting dental care.
Right.
So how fitting that on the week that we've seen it pass, that's happening, because that's the kind of politician that he was. He was in it for the little guy. He was in it to genuinely make people's lives better, and we need a lot more politicians like him in Ottawa.
Don't apologize. We had a lot of New Democrats. I think Bob Ray got misty-eyed. Not a New Democrat now, but he was back in the day when Ed Broadbent was the leader. Fred, it was interesting to hear the way people, we had Brian Mulroney on the show last night talking about it, saying he would have been the Prime Minister had he run for any other party.
Right, he was number one in the polls and most beloved party leader back in the 80s. I remember Ed from his second go around in politics when he made his comeback, when I was just a young pup arriving in Ottawa, and he was here for a few parliaments. And I remember his last speech when he gave in the House, we talked about decorum and how bad things were compared to 20 years prior when he was first in, and how people aren't respectful to each other the way they used to be. And it was fascinating to me to think back to this 20 years ago when he said that, and now look where we are.
Yeah,
20 years further. Where are we going to be 20 years from now? Things are going down a bad path in terms of decorum and how parliamentarians treat each other, and maybe virtual parliament is something that could help in the future if we do more of that.
Yeah, we got about 40 seconds left, but it is a reminder that you can disagree and still be dignified, which is what Ed Broadbent certainly brought to the table.
Yeah, and great interview with Brian Mulroney yesterday. David, you talked about how that free trade election was kind of your first memory. For me, it would either be 79 or 80, because it was Clark, Trudeau, and Broadbent. And at dinner table, my father asked us who we liked. And I said Ed Broadbent. My older brother started to scoff, and my dad said, no, let him finish. Why? And so, yeah, I was a New Democrat first.
For a few minutes.
Quick second.
But I said because he cares about poor people. And I was surprised, even though I did a major paper on Broadbent, that he had a PhD, because his ability to speak and get that message through was excellent.
Yeah, a university professor that won by 15 votes in his first election and led for almost 15 years. That's it, gang. Great to have you back. Greg McEachern, Melanie Richer, Fred Delory, thanks for coming in.